Hey, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how to write and watch stories like a writer. So there you go. That's what we're talking about today.
With your eyes. Boom, episode over. Later.
I have a question. Does Johnny need a worst show ever? I feel like Johnny might need a worst show ever. We're not being responsive to his needs.
Well, I'll just go first in something cool.
Is it something supremely uncool? I'm getting the feeling it's something supremely uncool.
Ask me what I found cool this week.
What did you find cool this week?
Nothing.
Wow, you are turning into Dave over time.
Nothing. Fuck the world. Fuck everybody.
Wow.
I'm done. I'm out. See you guys later.
This would be awesome if Dave reached off camera and then brought a handful of balloons onto camera and then just floated away.
Actually, if Dave reaches off camera and then pulls back in, you'll see that I'm actually on his hand.
We all float down here.
Yeah.
I've never wanted quite as much for a giant asteroid to strike the planet, but yeah,
Wow.
It's all good.
Dave and I are writing a book where an asteroid does strike the planet.
Oh, good.
You know,
Are you the cause of this, Johnny?
Could it happen soon?
I have to say, as dark as I've ever felt, I've never wished for the entire planet to suffer.
Well, because kind of what's the point, right? Like what are we saving at this
Well,
point?
some people are happy. Don't fuck them.
No, I don't know.
It's
We're
just
working
you're
on
having
that.
a bad week.
We're working on it. We're working on making sure nobody's happy. Give it time.
Johnny
Wow.
sounds an
He's
awful
worse
lot
than
like
me.
he might be from New York.
He's a nihilist.
Have you
Yeah.
noticed that?
Worst year ever.
Okay, so Johnny has nothing cool. Dave, do you have
No.
anything cool?
Not
Yes,
that I do have nothing cool. There is nothing cool.
There is nothing cool. So if Dave and I, wow, see what you're doing there?
Mm-hmm. Giving you opportunities.
If Dave and I are, I don't know what to say. I lost it. Yeah,
There you go. Okay.
Well, you've lost all of your life, all of your buoyancy. You're so angry. I feel like we need to really genuinely start a worst show ever again.
Yeah, but you can't be funny about what's wrong with the world right now.
Oh, that's true.
You can
And
only
it
be
doesn't-
funny when it's what's wrong with Dave.
Right, because Dave's stuff comes from inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Okay.
Well-
Talk about a little movie or TV show or something.
Something meaningless and trivial in the grand scheme of things, because cosmic destruction and doom is
All right, so should we change it to something trivial, at least for this week? Dave,
There you go. Something trivial.
no, my something trivial is something cool.
All right.
I did the Apple Arcade has a free month. Are you familiar with Apple Arcade? I don't really play games on the iPad, so I never really thought about it. But there was one that looked pretty cool and depressing, so I was like, okay, I'll try it for a month. It's called Inmost. It's like a pixel game. I'm not really into like the retro look, but it's also got a little. It's
you
a
mean
sort
it's
of
like 8-bit looking?
a little like the characters are, but some of the other stuff is not. It's polished and like
It
there's
has like sprites with like
there's
more-
rain effects and stuff, and it's just really atmospheric and moody, and it's like three different stories, and they kind of come together and relate in a very dark, goddamn depressing way, and the music is absolutely beautiful. I want there to be a soundtrack. It's not out yet. They said when they release on Steam they might, but I just fucking love the game I play. It's only like 4 or 5 hours, I don't know, but it's a beautiful game. And if you have an iPad or iPhone, whatever.
What kind of game is it?
It's a side scroller, I guess.
Okay.
And you're doing things as three different people. Like one of them is like, fighting these things, other is searching for something, and you're also like this little girl that's like stuck in her house and you don't know what the fuck's going on, and all three stories come together in a surprising and very depressing way that I can't spoil, but
Is this
goddamn.
something-
Did they wake up in 2020?
Is this something you play on your iPad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful game. So it's called Inmost. It's on Apple Arcade. It will be on Steam this summer, pretty soon, I guess. So
My something cool is probably no surprise, a show. And I'll see the finale of it tonight, so I'm not really sure how it shakes out, but I've enjoyed it so far. It's High Fidelity, which was
That Nick Hornsby novel?
Yeah. So right. So it was a Nick Hornsby novel in '95, and in year 2000, it was a movie with John Cusack.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And it was the breakout role for Jack Black, actually. And then Hulu just rebooted it with they did a gender swap, and it's Zoe Kravitz is the John Cusack character, and she has a record shop in Brooklyn.
Did it piss off a lot of angry white dudes?
I'm sure it did. I didn't hear anything about that, but
they're taking away our roles.
The answer is yes. Everybody's pissed off about everything, Dave.
yes, but the answer is definitely yes. But I'm enjoying it. Like there's a couple episodes I really liked, and a couple episodes that were like, oh, that was okay. But the episodes I really liked, I did like a lot, and it's not the best show ever, but it is entertaining, and I really like Zoe Kravitz.
It is a show.
It is a show. I mean, I watch a lot of shit. Like sometimes it's hard to measure up, but I did like it, and
I heard good things about it.
Yeah. So.
All right.
I feel like we should really change the topic of this show, and just why 2020 has like it is shit.
It's a dumpster fire.
Yeah. Would you like that, Johnny?
Well, how to read and watch like a writer. Well, I did. At least the pain is funny.
Oh,
Dave's
never felt closer to you.
I think Dave he's on the other end. He's gonna be all go get him now. And
well, Dave actually, this is my real something cool. Dave did a full outline for our next project, but we're always, even when we have the best of intentions before we start something. All right, dude, here's the idea. You know, it's going to be a season. There's going to be this many episodes. Let's just map out the whole thing ahead of time. I don't know how many times we've said, let's map out the whole thing ahead of time. And then we get to episode 1, and I just feel it from Dave. He's like, fuck this outlining shit. I need to find the story by writing. So then episode 1 just goes into production. But he fought all of those impulses and used all his patience. And
we also had a couple of weeks of time to, usually those couple of weeks, if I'm writing the story, I'm still finding and I'm changing it. So this time, maybe I was finding it in the outline stage versus doing an outline in 2 days and knowing what the fuck I'm going to write, because I'm never going to come up with something I like in a few days.
No, we've had I want to say 3 weeks that we spent developing, and it was really fun. We would meet twice a week, and okay, here's the questions, and here's the answers, and Dave would kick it, along, and it's kind of awesome. We have a full season of something outlined, which we've never been able to do more than even an episode and a half out, maybe. And so I don't know. It's a project.
Hopefully, I don't change shit too.
Yeah, well, you will. You absolutely will. And I've liked all the conversations around the process here too, because we've been writing together for almost 10 years now, which is, or actually for more than 10 years now, which is really crazy. And we know about each other's process a lot. So it made sense to really think about what we each do best and structure the entire project around it. And we have, and it's been really rewarding. I'm really looking forward to this one. And Bonnie says it's an awesome outline.
Thank you. I haven't yet looked at her notes because I saw there were like 8 million. She was up pretty late working on that. I saw there's like 8 million notes. I was like, oh my God, I'm just going to jump off a bridge because there's going to be so many things to fix. But Sean said it's not all that. So.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't try to fix them as you go along. Just kind of go through and read everything. And then you'll.
Well, that's what I'm worried about. Like when I see like a million notes, it's like, oh my God, how do I address these notes and put the puzzle back together before I start writing?
Yeah, it's not like that. Because the outline really was in shape, so it's more about seeing how, like another pass through with a greater understanding. It only makes you more jazzed to write. you know, a lot of the things that you do end up finding in the story that requires you to rewrite, you're finding those in the outline. And Bonnie's super good at that kind of question. You know, she'll ask you something that, well, I'm glad you asked me now because finding out in chapter 13 is expensive, you know, but thinking about it in the outline before you start writing.
No, she has great insight. And I think every time she's ever been involved with something I've written early on, it's made it for the better. So
yeah, she did not have anything to do with the Dead Baby on Christmas book. That was before her time. That was all Dave.
So getting to the topic, do you guys find yourselves reading and watching differently? What recommendations would anybody have?
Oh, this isn't the 2020 sucks topic? Because, okay.
It's not going to get funnier. So you should just move on to the topic.
You don't want to make Johnny cry on camera.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely read and watch everything differently. I'm an avid consumer of stories. I really, really love movies and TV. TV's more than movies these days. It used to be definitely the other way around. I don't even know exactly when it changed. It was just all of a sudden, wait a minute, I'm getting way more enjoyment out of TV these days than movies. I mean, that started with some really great shows in the very late 90s, early 2000s. The Sopranos, Lost, Battlestar Galactica, just really great stuff. But then now with the streaming wars and people just dropping content constantly, there's 500 TV shows and there's gonna be even way more. It's just kind of amazing how much is out there. So, you know, I do pay attention. I pay attention to two things, what's popular and what things make me feel. So those aren't always the same thing. I was talking with Neve, I guess, a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the show You, which is a show, like I watched that because Haley was watching a few episodes. And that's a show that I don't really care about it. It doesn't connect with me, but I understand why it's popular and it's something to watch and kind of deconstruct. So there's that thing where, you know, if you're a writer, you should write every day and read every night, you know, or some combination of that. And I don't read as much external people as I used to because I collaborate a lot, which means I'm reading a lot anyway, just during the day. And when I'm not reading for work, you know, I kind of want to unplug and watch something. But I'm always watching it as, I mean, sometimes a lot of times I always enjoy, but sometimes I'm not turned off at all and I'm really like studying, and sometimes I'm just gliding through the story. So it kind of depends on my mood, but I would say that I'm never watching something without at least a tiny little part of myself kind of on and critical. How about you guys?
I think it's a little more subtle for me. I do it. Well, no, I do notice things, but I do tend to get fooled by movies in ways that if I were being analytical, I wouldn't. And that's nice. Like, I like that I can turn that off and be surprised rather than being like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. But the converse happens too, where sometimes I'm anticipating a twist. I don't know necessarily what it's going to be, and then it doesn't happen. And that always feels like a letdown. That's always like, well, there was a missed opportunity, or then I feel like the storyteller kind of dropped the ball. One of the things that I thought of with this topic was, I mean, obviously the number one thing that I'm noticing when I'm watching something, either consciously or subconsciously, is, this sounds ridiculous, but is there a story? And or a story that I care about that has a beginning, middle, and end and an arc, which makes me wonder. I just don't understand P.T. Anderson, Sean. I know you're like in love with him, but I just do not get this guy. I started watching Hard 8, and I'm like, I don't understand why this guy's doing this. I don't understand the fucking crackpot situation these people got themselves into.
Hard 8 was a long time ago.
Oh, okay. Well, let me watch a contemporary one, like I did last week or whatever it was.
There Will Be Blood.
Yeah, well, that's not contemporary, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't mean to pick on P.T. Anderson. Bonnie gave the best sort of language for this that I've continued to use, of like, I think I appreciate him, but I don't seem to enjoy him. But it seems to boil down to, I'm waiting for shockingly, a story. Like, I haven't finished Hard Eight yet. I kind of watch things in pieces.
Oh, you don't need to. Yeah. So
well, I kept waiting for There Will Be Blood to have a conclusion, and it was just like, no.
Did you
just,
like Magnolia?
No, I didn't really like Magnolia either, because we had this
wow.
discussion. Because it's a bunch of shit that happens, at least to me.
Yeah, okay. So what that is, you're right. There's not really story there, but there is, because there's micro stories, and it's really about the characters, and it's about the stories they're telling themselves. It's about the stories of how they interact. The stories.
It's about characters who I don't like pretty universally. So they're not even characters that I want to root for.
Which is fair, but he's an observer of the human condition. So
Wait, didn't you guys write Invasion?
well, yeah, actually,
But only Meyer is reprehensible. The other,
Yeah.
well, no, that's not true. There's a little bit to hate about everybody, but
but actually that does it doesn't confuse me. I guess it surprises me a little bit, because you do like to do those stories, Johnny, where there's
I have not done a story like There Will Be Blood. There would be some sort of an arc or redemption, or I don't want to spoil it. I wish I could spoil it for everybody who hasn't seen it, because you get to the end and you're like,
It's
nothing
20
that I
years
expected was going to
old.
happen was gonna, and kind of fuck you.
But that's
Spoil it, go
because it's
ahead.
a tragedy.
But who the hell wants to watch just something slowly? Like, it wasn't even, I don't
It's
know.
2020. Who wants tragedy? Come on.
All right.
Usually in a tragedy, unless you're talking like true Shakespearean tragedy, where just everybody just dies at the end, which, to be fair, is maybe what he was going for. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not interested in those stories. Maybe it's another appreciate versus enjoy thing.
Yeah, no, I think that is. I think P.T. Anderson makes very personal films, and I'll say this about Anderson, because The Master is probably the best example. Like, I don't enjoy that movie. Like, I watched that movie. I've tried 3 different times now. I don't enjoy the movie. However, there's so many things that I love about the movie that watching it is kind of an enjoyable experience, if that makes sense. So I don't, no, because you're right, Johnny, as a story, what the fuck is The Master even about? But it is gorgeously shot. I love the way the music works. The Freddy character that Joaquin Phoenix plays is not just an amazing character, it's a brilliant performance. Philip Seymour Hoffman is amazing. And the scene where he's interviewing Joaquin Phoenix is one of my favorite scenes ever shot, even though I don't like the movie that much. So it's just that he's so good at getting great performances and writing super great dialogue. And it's very emotional stuff. He's not a great storyteller. He's more of a cinematic painter. And sometimes, like, I just really like seeing what an artist has done in that way. So anyway, yeah, but I get why. I would never ever look to P.T. Anderson though as somebody.
If you're trying to write a commercial thing.
Right. I'm not looking for what I can learn from P.T. Anderson.
Right. I'm looking at it as the question of, how do I look at things as a writer? And so I'm just trying to think if there's a way that I can explain this. All right. In There Will Be Blood, there's a redemption or a reconciliation that I kept waiting to happen, or between those two same people, a clash. But it didn't happen. Just one of them just kind of gets beaten into submission. Like, the guy's just weak the whole time, and the other guy's an asshole the whole time. And you're just like, I don't know. So watching it as a writer, I was expecting anything but what happened, and not in a good way. Not in a like, wow, he managed to surprise me. It was more like,
agree.
why did I watch it? Yeah.
That's how I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's
how I
story,
felt.
right?
But that's how I felt leaving the theater, for sure. And again, I don't, for some reason, I have this pattern with his movies every time. I'm really excited about them because something about the trailer just nabs me, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be so awesome. Because he always uses visuals and music perfectly in his trailers. Then I go see it, and I'm like,
Wait, you didn't love Magnolia in the theater?
I did love Magnolia in the theater.
Okay.
I love Boogie
That's
Nights.
the only one I loved in the theater.
I love Boogie Nights and Magnolia in the theater, but I've seen every one of his movies in the theater except Inherent Vice, which I
I did like Boogie Nights because it had a fucking story. How novel.
I liked his first 2. I saw Hard 8 on DVD later after I already had a P.T. Anderson boner. and was probably an apologist for it. I don't remember it being especially good. Punch Drunk Love, there's so much I love about that movie, although I don't love the movie, which is how I feel about all of his work. Like I always get something from it, but it's just not a great movie in the traditional sense, which does come down to story. I totally hear what Johnny's saying. I don't disagree.
So those are, I mean, I'm just trying to keep it rather than just as like P.T. Anderson pros and cons, sort of, you know, how do we watch and consume? But I would compare him if for me, I'm getting sort of some negative reactions out of P.T. Anderson films as a writer. Interestingly, I mean, I don't know if you guys see this at all, but for some reason I see him and Aronofsky is sort of on the same spectrum. They're both, you know, auteurs. They're both, The Fountain is similarly weird, like some of his movies. But
perfect, you mean? Yes.
Well, I don't have that issue with Aronofsky. Like you go all the way back to Pi, and it's like, even though that story is just like, what the hell is going on here? I did appreciate it, but I think that I think it's different. I think I'm able to see things to some degree the way that a non-writer would see them, but then I also have sort of the scope of like, there's been a few times I've annoyed my family. Well, I would have done this, you know, that sort of thing. Are you guys, what was that?
I was going to say the difference too is economy. P.T. Anderson is more indulgent with your time than Darren Aronofsky is. Darren Aronofsky movies move fast. Like Requiem for a Dream, 90 minutes. Pi's 90 minutes. Like these are, maybe it's 100.
Requiem was too depressing for me.
Yeah, but then look at Tarantino, who really takes his time too. Some of that shit's super indulgent.
Yes, but there's story there.
There is, well, yes, exactly. So when you're just going to be, okay, so there's no pace and no story and no real reason for me to watch, I'm not going to be interested.
Yeah, here's something that I'll admit about P.T. Anderson is that and I think that this is the way art is. So how many artists are there where like you love one record of theirs, or album, or I don't know what words kids are using.
The stank.
Like imagine you're really into that one Korn album, and you just got a thing for Limp Bizkit, and so you 3 albums later, you're still like hoping that, you know, the Spin Doctors are still going to deliver, right? But you made, okay, Pearl Jam was mine. I really, really loved Pearl Jam, and I kept buying Pearl Jam albums, hoping that I would somehow recapture.
I was having this thought the other day. I had a conversation actually with someone. Like I loved Pearl Jam's first, like up until Versus, I guess.
Yeah.
And then after that, like they didn't speak to me anymore. And I don't know if I changed or they changed.
You know, Versus is their second album, right?
Wait. The one
you got to the wedding scene.
Wait, there's 3 albums that I liked. I don't remember. There's the first one. There's
it goes
10
Versus, Vitology.
Okay.
And then
if you're keeping up, we're also listening as writers.
So but Dave feels me here, right? You have an allegiance to a band and you keep wanting to, like, I know I'm going to feel that same connection that I felt before. Mm-hmm. But it's not really sustainable.
Yeah. The band that did this to me was M. Night Shyamalan.
You know, M. Night's a great example, actually. M. Night, because we gave him some buy-in because his stuff was so, it affected us, right? So when I'm P.T. Anderson was that for me. Magnolia hit at exactly the right time. It was 99, which was such a great year for movies. I was really invested in all those movies. And then that was like my favorite movie of that year. So everything that came after was just like, oh, he's one of my favorite directors. It kind of had a halo effect. And I think...
And stuff you see in your 20s. It's just like music you find in your 20s sticks with you forever, and then later on it's like
you know, this is stuff I saw before I had children, before I was like a fully formed adult. You know, I was dating Cindy, my life was exciting
before your beak fully formed is you can be.
But I still think even there's things to learn as a creator. How do you create those bonds with a reader where they will give everything you have a halo effect? How can you be their hoobastank? Right? And I think that I was a lot better about this at the beginning of the year because I was keeping a little journal and writing like 100 or so words about everything that I wrote, and then I just didn't keep up with it.
Everything you wrote, or everything you watched or read?
Everything I watched. And I want to get back to that. I actually want to be good about the Something Cool channel in our Slack. And, you know, I watched this, and I feel like I need like a couple of prompts, like, why did this work commercially? Why did it fail commercially? Why did it resonate with me? Because those are the questions I want to ask. Like, did this work or not, and why? So Johnny asks, you know, was I engaged on a story level? You know, what about it? Why would I recommend this to somebody? Or why wouldn't I? Or who would I? Because there's a lot of stuff I would recommend to Dave, but not necessarily Johnny, or Bonnie, but not necessarily Dave, or, right? Like, you have specific recommendations for specific people, and understanding why helps you to understand why that story worked on a smaller or larger level.
I tend to, for books, I try not to read too much in my own genre because I don't want to influence what I'm writing. But at the same time, whenever I read something outside of my genre, like if I were to read fantasy, I'd want to write a fantasy book. It's like, it kind of fucks with me. So it's easier for me with TV because TV is quickly digestible. It doesn't.
Well, TV, you could be the ultimate genre hopper.
Well, yeah, and it doesn't stick with you as long. And when you're with a book, you're spending time with it, and it, you know, changes how you think about things. TV and movies a little bit less so. I tend to learn more from. There's movies that they're not B movies, they're a little bit above that, but like lower budget or indie movies and stuff that are good but not great. And a lot of times I learn a lot from those because I can see what is missing more than, like, if you have just this great, you know, big budget movie and it fails, it's harder to see why it failed sometimes for me than it is with a sort of a mid-tier movie, because it's close and you can see exactly what happened that could have made it better. I tend to learn the most from those movies. And from TV, obviously there's a lot of great TV. You know, I learned stuff like pacing and stuff like that, and how to have individual character arcs. And I think that really shows in our season stuff that we do, our serials.
I also find that I watch and read different sort of categories of fiction different ways. So here's what I mean. So if I were to watch a Michael Bay movie, then I'm going in, if I'm smart, then I'm going in saying, okay.
Wait, you just contradicted yourself.
Yeah, okay. But you know what? Like, if I'm going to go, I'd better know that I'm not going to expect a great story. I'm not going to expect great characters. Like, things are going to blow up, right? And maybe not even robots, right? So,
and there's going to be some American flags and ass.
But going into like, you know, any of the, I guess because there's things that are, there's the spectrum. There's things that are purely commercial, and there's things that are. There's very few things I think that are purely art on that scale just because of the cost involved. Like, everything has to be at least a little commercial, because when you're spending that much money.
Christopher Nolan.
Well, but I was actually going to raise him as an example. I would definitely.
A unicorn, though.
No, I think he's an auteur who manages to speak to a mainstream. I mean, he behaves like auteur directors.
But it's only because he had the box office receipts. He always leveraged what he did. He made Batman Begins to make The Prestige, and he made Dark Knight to make Inception. Like, I
still don't know how Inception worked, like, with the general public, because it feels like one of those movies that, like The Fountain, like, puzzled the people that were in my audience. Inception feels like that movie.
Because of
not
scale,
to me.
Dude.
Yeah, no,
I loved it.
Inception had a ton of cool. You know what I mean? Like the spinning hallway and the dream within a dream. I think that goes a long way with people, even if they don't get
Johnny's totally right. And Dave, you actually know this because there was a different version of The Fountain. The Fountain was made for $30 million, but there was a $150 million version of that movie with Brad Pitt and Kate Beckinsale? No.
Kate Blanchett?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Yes. So that whole other movie existed. and it had that Inception scale. So maybe Fountain could have been sold, you know, to a much wider audience with that amount of money, but Brad Pitt pulled out, and
it feels too cerebral though for the, and I'm not saying, you know, moviegoers are stupid. I think like there's a good chunk of people that are stupid, obviously, like 40% of America. But
that's just a sweeping generalization.
I'm being an asshole.
Would you like to stand by 40% of America?
35.5%. Okay. No, I'm just saying I think it's more cerebral, more intellectual than most movies that do that well at the box office. I think most people aren't going to the movies to think they're going to the movies to watch shit blow up, basically. And Inception did have a bit of that, but I feel that the story, I don't know, I felt like it really shouldn't have worked. I'm glad it did, but I really feel like there wasn't enough action to offset the level of thinking that I think the movie required to really pay off and hit.
You're talking about Inception?
I think the difference between Inception and The Fountain, and I'm not remembering The Fountain totally well, so I could be wrong about this, but I think you could say it of any like art movie that it felt like that you either got it or you didn't get it. Whereas Inception, you could get it a little bit. You could get it 10%, you could get it 20%.
Yeah, that's
if you
fair.
study it, you could get it 100%. So the people who are getting it 10, 20% are still like, ooh, that guy was asleep. That was cool, you know? And the hallway spun. So that guy can appreciate it as much as the person who really studies and figures it out.
It's no Upstream Color, though.
No. Well, I think, and actually I think that that's sort of my point about the art versus commercial is most things have to be, well, I mean, you know, they don't have to be art, but I think everything has to be at least a little commercial, just a little bit at least. But I think that the intent, it's like, is the intention art first or is it commerciality first? And I notice that with my own books too. Every time I have to basically make a decision what's going to be primary. So like Upstream Color, Shane Carruth I don't think he probably had to make his money back and that's it. You know, if I make the money back, then I'm happy because I made some art. Whereas Michael Bay is like, how many, you know, Brinks trucks can I have back up to my house at the end or any of my producers' houses or anything like that. So I think that knowing the intention behind it has, like, I think about my own intention behind something too. Like, what's the purpose here? Do I just want to make it amazing? Do I want to make it great? Does it need to sell? Can it do both? That sort of thing.
So what do you think, what do you think is something that has translated well that you've tried most to emulate? Like something like Inception for me, like I don't know how I would do a book that would translate the same way. Is there something that you've seen that you've tried to kind of figure out how the fuck they did that and either been able to do it or tried to do it and didn't? I don't know.
I have sort of a sideways answer to that. It's not, I can't think of a specific technique or anything, but I know that there's been sort of a general like meta perception of what people do. And I know that that's like the vaguest thing ever, but like what do movie makers tend to do on a spectrum? What do TV makers tend to do? What do writers tend to do? And it's like the more, at least for me, the more that I absorb, the more stuff I watch, the more stuff I read, the more story I assimilate, I have this broader I don't know if this is going to make any sense. I have this broader appreciation for like, well, here's sort of the conventions and here's how somebody just said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm trying to think of a good example where there's, I mean, I could say P.T. Anderson said, well, I don't want to have a story, but you know, I mean, I can't think of any clear examples, but like, you know, today a filmmaker who used only like tripods and dollies, like fixed position camera sorts of things would look really weird because everything's handheld and shaky now. That's a stupid example, but, or maybe a good one is Tarantino with his out of order storytelling, or the way we watched Inglourious Bastards again this weekend. And so, you know, there's those sections where there's like a shot of the crowd and then it pauses and there's a sign that says Herman Goering with an arrow. Like you shouldn't be able to do that. Kurt Russell having a one line voiceover in, Hollywood, and it's just like it's just a comment on Mama Cass or something like that, and then it's over. So like being able to see like what the spectrum is as opposed to like this very narrow perception of what a storyteller does, I think gives me access to new tools.
Yeah, for me, it's like I'm always adding new cards to the deck. So it's like, oh, did you see this show and they did this thing? Because I mean, it's really helpful when the person you're collaborating with has seen that thing too, because then it's just immediate. You're like right on the same page, and you kind of see how even if your scene is totally different, how that element, what the purpose of it was. But even if your person hasn't seen it, like let's say your writing partner has suggested that you read the book Sphere 1,000 times and you still haven't done it, those scenarios can still come up, over and over and over. And once you understand them, then they just make plotting easier, because it's like they're Lego pieces and you can just kind of build whatever you want.
What about you, Dave? What's your answer to that question you asked?
Like I've tried to do like the fountain.
Uh-oh, his family's home.
Coming in my office. Like the fountain. Like I wanted to write something like that's like supremely romantic and talks about fate, destiny, and all these like big concept sorts of things. And I don't feel I've been able to do it yet. That is my goal, to someday write something that makes me feel as much as I felt in that movie. Even though, I've watched the movie since then, and there are things that aren't perfect. There are things I can understand why people might not enjoy it as much. But I still love it, and I want to create something that has such feeling in it as that movie.
I want to do that with you. We can write the fountain. Okay. I'm serious. That's awesome.
Let's see if Brad Pitt will star in it.
Yeah, someday. No, he'll be too old by the time we get there, but we can still write it.
I think maybe another thing that goes on the heels of what I was trying to articulate in the last thing is the idea. I keep coming back to that quote that I think, Sean, you told it to me like very near the beginning of our friendship, and it was, or at least the podcast, where it was like, it's that Hank Ketchum quote about, the day I found my voice. That was the day I found my voice when I stopped trying to be Van Morrison. And so, because I was thinking this when Dave was talking about, like, you see somebody else's work or you read somebody else's work and you're awed by it, and it feels inaccessible to some degree. So like Clive Barker's probably a good example, because he's so like, it's like eating a very rich dessert. Like his prose is just this amazing magical prose. And so if you aren't the kind of person who writes that way, then it's like, oh, well, that's magical. I could never reach that. But it doesn't mean that that's better or worse than what you do. It just means that it's like sideways to what you do. And so I think that that's what I was trying to say about absorbing a lot of story, is it really rams home for me in a visceral way that story is told in the voice of the storyteller, and that my voice or either of your voices or anybody else's voices are unique, and we're never going to be a Clive Barker or a P.T. Anderson or anybody like that, because we are us. So you can only be the best you, which sounds a little trite, but there you go.
And actually, like when I was thinking about this show topic, when I saw the notes last night and I was thinking about it before I went to sleep, I actually had the thought that you just reminded me of. As a writer right now, like I was influenced by Stephen King and Dean Koontz and a few other people, growing up. And I think when I write thrillers and I write horror and sci-fi now, you might feel a little bit of that, but not too much. I'm not trying to be them. I have my own voice. And I think if I was to try and write a fantasy book right now, it would probably be too much like other things I've read, because I don't have my voice in that genre. And I think I don't know how I get past that. If I need to write a few crappy fantasy stories before I do a real one, or I'm not sure, but I do feel like the voice, like I'm confident in one area, but if I was to try to do something differently and try to write, my idea of what that should be, I don't know that I'm ready for that yet. And I don't know how to learn from that? Like, if I read more fantasy and stuff, will I be even
I think it's just
less
doing.
likely to write?
No, I think it's just doing. Like you have a really confident voice when you're doing things that you feel comfortable in. Like a comfort zone is a real thing for you.
Like writing about dead babies. I just do like if Parents
Just do
Magazine
Game of
wants
Thrones.
me to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that you need to give yourself the right circumstances and the right unicorns in your world to make it feel like it's a Davy thing, so you don't feel like you're an imposter.
A very Davy fantasy.
Yeah, the moment you feel like you're an imposter in the fantasy world, then it's going to show up in your writing. But like, look what King did with Eye of the Dragon. Like that really feels like a Stephen King book, even though it's also fantasy.
Yeah, or even Dark Tower. I mean, I think that the real question is, if you feel like you can't create a good fantasy book, there are two options there, and they're probably blending together, or two possible reasons. One would be that you would genuinely create a bad fantasy book by some objective standard, but the other is, well, what are you comparing it against? Are you comparing it against the other fantasy books? Because again, to voice, what's to say that it's a bad book? So I think that's what a lot of writers struggle with, is this doesn't look like my heroes or the people that I consider successful in the genre or something. So is it bad? Well, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And I think that's what we have to figure out.
Yeah, I think I think with fantasy is, well, I haven't read a ton of it. I read more when I was younger of it. So there might be some of my unfamiliarity with it. But also, I think with like horror and thrillers and shit like that, I'm not trying to be or do, like, I'm not trying to be the next Stephen King. I'm just writing my thing. And I think it works because of that. If I was trying to write a fantasy right now, I'd be probably trying to write like, that next thing. I don't know.
How do you guys consume movies versus books differently? Reading versus, or TV for that matter? Movies, visual versus reading? Like in terms of writing, what do you get from them? Is there a difference?
The difference in my consumption between movies and television is that I don't mind breaking up TV at all, not just episode to episode, but within episodes. If I see it in 3 pieces, I'm fine with that. It is more like picking up a book and putting it down. Like if I can pick up a book and read 3 pages and okay, well, I'll pick that up where I left off later. Like I watch TV in that way. Movies are like, I really don't like interrupting a movie. I'd like to see it intact. That's the way it was designed to be consumed. I really want to see it intact. And I can't do that with
someone
books.
talking to you while it's going.
I can't do that with books. And, most shows you can't do that unless you really schedule time on the calendar. So that's the main difference between movies and television for me, is how.
No, sorry, I didn't mean like mechanically. I meant, do you get different things? Like if you watch a visual medium versus reading a book, are you looking for different things? Are you getting different things?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, I don't know. Let me see if I can say this the right way. When I'm watching things, I'm looking for the result of what they did, and then sometimes thinking about how that could be done on the page. But usually I'm just looking at the trick and then it shows up on the page later. I'm like, oh, this is like when they did that. I can do this here. But I'm not really thinking about it in that way. When I'm reading, I'll think, oh, that's how they use language in that way. So I'm not just thinking about the trick. I'm actually looking at the practical application, and that shows up, the next time I need it too. I feel like both of them are, gathering tricks over time that show up on the page later.
I think with reading, I try to, see how they set things up and like character arcs and stuff like that. With TV and movies, I think more than anything, I'm looking at the economy of language in those things and how they like the beginning of Up is a good example. Like, how do you make somebody care instantly and be heartbroken by a love story? Well, Up did it in a few minutes. So like I watch things to try to learn how to get the most impact in the least amount of time. So it's not too indulgent. So it's not just fucking 55,000 words for a 4-minute thing.
I actually didn't realize this until just now when I was listening to you guys talk, but I actually think, and I'll just brand new idea, so I don't actually know if it's true, but it feels true, is that I think that when I'm reading, obviously I notice story. Obviously, you can't help but for spending a really long time with it and you immerse and everything. But really, I think what I get out of writing is writing, meaning that I'm reading somebody else's writing, is a feel of the language itself. Like I tend to, so for instance, one of the things I think we've mentioned on the podcast a few times is when it comes to Fight Club, I vastly prefer the book. Sean prefers the movie. And I kept saying, well, but there's something in the way that Palahniuk writes. There's this, you can't capture that. And now Fincher does a really good job. Like he did, he conveyed the weird schizophrenic nature of Fight Club and that language pretty well. But you can't totally.
Had you read it before you'd seen it?
I had, and I'm sure that's part of the reason.
I think that has a lot to do with it.
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I read it first, I'd probably feel allegiant to the book.
Yeah, the only fiction that I remember liking the second one better was The Hunger Games. I didn't like the books that much. The voice really annoyed me. But I think that the other reason is I do notice sort of meter and rhyme. So, or not rhyme, but the rhythm of language. So like Catch-22 is one of my favorite books. And so I was like, well, I'm going to read another Joseph Heller book. So I picked up Something Happened. Well, nothing happened. And in like, I think I read like 50 pages and I was like, well, I'm entranced by the way this guy writes. I love the feel of his language, which is, I also feel about Clive Barker, by the way. But with Clive Barker's longer works, I've tried to read Imagica like 5 times because it's so, you get in there, you're like, oh, this language is so good, so rich. And then the story just never grabbed me. But I'm with the movie, obviously I feel the filmmaker's vibe, but I'm noticing the story itself a lot more. I wonder if that's unusual.
No, I don't think so. I think for Clive Barker, it's been a while since I read it, but Sacrament is one of his shorter works, and that's probably his most personal and touching story, and that's probably more accessible than Imagica. I've given Imagica to different friends, and the reactions vary from I love this, the best thing ever, to why the fuck did you give this to me? I need a dictionary every other goddamn word.
So the scope is so big. Like I like the damn it, I had it just a second ago. The Great and Secret Show, I think it's called something like that.
Yes.
I love the Books of Blood, his shorts, a few others. But
I read the Great and Secret Show. Dave bought me the Great and Secret Show and Imagica. I didn't get into Imagica just because it's daunting. Like Great and Secret Show took me a million years to get through, and then Imagica was like, oh, it's like twice as long.
yeah, I mean, is he has one called The Damnation Game, I think, too?
Yes,
is that right?
That's an earlier one, yeah.
Yeah, I read that. I like his
one.
more of the horror stuff. The scope of Imagica just seems amazing, but I don't know.
Weave World is a good fantasy title that's a bit shorter, and by a bit, it's probably 600
It's not the
words.
length. It's that I don't think I like fantasy. But he tricks me into it because I'm like, it's Clive Barker and he's awesome. So I know.
I do know that we need to go, but before we close, Dave, do you remember that series that Johnny and I did called Space Shuttle?
Yeah, what about it?
Just like that would have been on your list of things least likely to ever have any legs to something happening for it,
Okay,
right?
and
Oh no, that's it. I'm just reminiscing right now. That's
That
all.
was
you.
fun. Also, Decoy Wallet and Redacted. They're both with P.T. Anderson right now. We said our co-writer thinks that there's no story here, and he said, no problem.
I will make it a 4-hour movie.
I don't know. He really hates it. He wanted to kill himself at the end. No problem.
Frogs will fall from the sky.
Right.
Man, I would love a P.T. Anderson version
Right.
of Space Shuttle.
Our character is really hateable. No problem. This has everything I like. All right. Well, we should go. So thanks everybody for listening to the Story Studio podcast. Sean, don't forget you always have the stop button now, so we could just have this little bit. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Peace out.
Bye.